When Emma first said it, I honestly thought she was teasing. We were sitting at the dinner table, candles burning low between us, the kind of night I had imagined would bring us closer after weeks of quiet tension. I reached out for her hand, searching for warmth, but she pulled away with a faint sigh. Then, with her eyes fixed on mine, she said clearly, "Once a month is enough, John. That's all I need." Her words hit harder than I let show. Once a month. That was what our marriage had been reduced to in her mind. A rationed allowance. As if intimacy were a bill she could barely afford to pay. I nodded at the time, pretending to understand, but inside something cracked. A husband should never feel like he's begging for affection. For weeks afterward, I tested her statement. I waited, silently, to see if she'd noticed the space she'd created. Days passed where I avoided her touch. I stopped leaning in for a kiss before leaving for work. When she dressed up for dinners with her friends, I didn't compliment her. I simply became the version of myself she claimed to want. A man who only showed up once a month. At first, Emma didn't notice. She was wrapped up in her own life, brunches, fitness classes, long calls with her sister where she laughed like a teenager again. But as time dragged on, something shifted. She began asking why I was so quiet, why I no longer reached for her at night, why I stayed late at work instead of hurrying home. "Is something wrong, John?" she asked one evening, her voice uncertain. I almost laughed at the irony. Wrong. Everything was wrong. But I reminded myself, I was only following her rules. She had said once a month was enough. Fine. Then my presence, my care, my effort would also arrive once a month. The first time I packed a bag and stayed at my brother's for a week. Her face was pale when I returned. She asked nothing, only watched in silence as I unpacked. The second time, she finally broke. "Why are you doing this?" she demanded. Bitterness surged in my chest. "I'm only giving you what you said you wanted." Her lips parted in shock, as though she hadn't expected her own words to return to her with such force. At first, she tried to laugh it off. "John, come on. You know I didn't mean it like that." She forced a smile, but her eyes darted nervously, betraying the fear she couldn't hide. I leaned back in my chair, arms crossed. "You said once a month was enough. I'm respecting that. I didn't realize you'd be upset when I matched your effort." That silenced her. She opened her mouth, then shut it again, her hands twisting in her lap. For years, I had been the one chasing her, planning dates, reminding her that marriage is more than just living under the same roof. But now, by doing exactly as she had asked, I'd held up a mirror she couldn't ignore. Weeks turned into months. The atmosphere in our home grew colder. Emma began hovering near me, giving half-hearted hugs, making excuses to sit close on the couch. It was almost pitiful. One night, when she touched my arm and whispered, "I miss us," I answered flatly, "I'll see you on the 15th. It sounded like scheduling a doctor's appointment. The color drained from her face. "That's cruel," she whispered. "Cruel," I repeated, steady and low. Cruel is a wife treating intimacy like a chore. Cruel is a husband feeling unwanted in his own home. "I didn't set these rules, Emma, you did." For once, she had no response. The balance had shifted. She was the one waiting now, hoping, reaching. I remained unmoved. I could feel her frustration in the way she lingered in doorways, in her attempts to start conversations that withered into silence. One Saturday morning, she confronted me outright. "John, this isn't working. I can't stand this distance." I looked at her, really looked at her, and realized how much of our marriage had relied on me carrying all the weight. And now, when she finally reached for me, it wasn't out of love. It was out of fear of losing control. "This," I said quietly, "is exactly what I've lived with for years. Now you know how it feels." Her eyes filled with tears, and for a moment, I almost softened. But the memory of countless lonely nights, of her dismissing my needs with careless shrugs, kept me firm. She had taught me how to live without closeness. Now she was learning that lesson herself. The tension between us grew unbearable. Meals were eaten in silence. Conversations were reduced to bills, groceries, schedules. Our home felt less like a marriage, and more like a boarding house where two strangers shared a roof. Emma tried small gestures, making my favorite coffee, placing her hand on mine at dinner, dressing up without reason. But my responses stayed detached, measured, almost transactional. One night, as I prepared for bed, she stood in the doorway blocking me. "John, please," she whispered, her voice trembling. "I don't want this. I don't want us to be like this." I studied her. The woman I once adored stood there, looking broken. "Then why?" I asked evenly. "Why did you set the bar so low? You told me once a month was fine. That's what you offered me. That's what you thought I deserved." Her lips pressed tight, her eyes glistening. "I didn't realize what I was doing to you. I thought you'd always try no matter what." That confession cut deeper than rejection. "So you expected me to carry everything? The affection, the effort, the pursuit, all of it?" I shook my head. "That's not a marriage, Emma. That's servitude." Her tears spilled freely as she whispered, "I took you for granted." The words hung in the air, heavy, but they did little to melt the ice I had built around my heart. For years I had longed for her attention, only to be dismissed with excuses or half-hearted compromises. Now, with her begging for scraps of affection, I couldn't summon the will to give them. Weeks passed, and the cracks widened. Friends began to notice. At gatherings, Emma clung to me, laughed too loudly, touched my arm like she had something to prove. But behind closed doors, her frustration boiled. "You're punishing me," she snapped one night. "I'm showing you what our marriage has felt like through my eyes," I said calmly. "If that feels like punishment, maybe you should ask yourself why." She went pale, her words failing her, realization heavy on her face. In that moment, she finally understood. I was no longer the desperate husband begging for scraps of love. I had become a man unwilling to settle for half a marriage. And in that shift, Emma saw something terrifying. The indifference she had once taught me might be the very thing that ended us for good.